Welcome to Sports Law Media on YouTube. It is you got Sports Law broadcasting live today, February 4th, 2026. Today we have the Hoops and Pucks and Wednesdays Oh My, Season 1, Episode 12. In today's episode, we will discuss men and women's college basketball. We will discuss NBA G League basketball. We will discuss NBA basketball. We will discuss NHL hockey and other hockey associations. The hoops and pucks are taken care of there. The Wednesdays, oh my, all games in question take place today on Wednesday. So let's get into this. Before going into my picks for who I think will win the games, first we need to go over the Associated Press polls for the top 25 for men and women regarding where they rank. So we'll start with the women. For the AP poll, number 1, UConn, number 2, UCLA, number 3, South Carolina, number 4, Texas, number 5, LSU, number 6, Louisville, number 7, Vanderbilt, number 8, Michigan, number 9, Ohio State, number 10, Iowa, number 11, Oklahoma, number 12, Michigan State, number 13, Ole Miss, number 14, TCU, number 15, Baylor, number 16, Kentucky, number 17, Duke, number 18, Texas Tech, number 19, Tennessee, number 20, West Virginia, number 21, Alabama, number 22, Maryland, number 23, Princeton, number 24, Washington, and number 25, North Carolina. That's your women's Associated Press top 25 poll. Let's look now at the men's AP poll, top 25 poll, before getting into this. For the men, AP poll top 25. You have Arizona at number 1, number 2, Michigan, number 3, UConn, number 4, Duke, number 5, Illinois, number 6, Gonzaga, number 7, Iowa State, number 8, Houston, number 9, Nebraska, number 10, Michigan State, number 11, Kansas, number 12, Purdue, 13, Texas Tech, number 14, North Carolina, number 15, Vanderbilt, number 16, BYU, number 17, Florida, number 18, Virginia, 19 is St. Louis, number 20 is Clemson, 21, Arkansas, 22, St. John's, 23, Miami and Ohio, 24, Louisville, and 25, Tennessee. All right, let's look at the women's games, and I'll make my picks for those games today. Can y'all hear me out there in YouTube land? All right. Anyway, in women's college basketball, you have what I'm going to do is I'll go over one page of games and then go back and make my picks for that. All right, you have Colgate versus Army. You have Central Michigan versus Buffalo. Maryland Eastern Shore versus South Carolina State. You have St. Joseph's versus Rhode Island. You have Loyola Chicago versus Fordham. You have Davidson versus St. Bonaventure. South Florida versus East Carolina. South Carolina Upstate versus Presbyterian. High Point versus Winthrop. American University versus Bucknell. Loyola Maryland versus Lehigh. UNC Asheville versus Charleston Southern. Eastern Michigan versus Cincinnati. You have Dayton versus LaSalle. You have Cleveland State versus IU Indianapolis. You have Northern Illinois versus Ball State. You have Nebraska versus Michigan. You have Utah versus UCF. Xavier versus St. John's. Villanova versus Butler. Georgetown versus Creighton. Penn State versus Purdue. Redford versus Longwood. Lafayette versus Navy. Western Michigan versus Ohio University. And Bowling Green versus Kent State. My picks for those games are as follows. I have Colgate defeating Army. I have Buffalo defeating Central Michigan. South Carolina State will defeat Maryland Eastern Shore. St. Joseph's will defeat Rhode Island. Loyola Chicago defeats Fordham. Davidson defeats St. Bonaventure. East Carolina to defeat South Florida. South Carolina Upstate loses to Presbyterian. High Point loses to Winthrop. American University loses to Bucknell. Loyola Maryland defeats Lehigh. UNC Asheville will defeat Charleston Southern. Eastern Michigan will defeat Massachusetts. Toledo will defeat Akron. Maryland will defeat Michigan State. Baylor will defeat Cincinnati. Dayton will defeat LaSalle. Cleveland State will defeat IU Indianapolis. Northern Illinois will defeat Ball State. Nebraska will defeat Michigan or lose to Michigan. I'm sorry, Northern Illinois will lose to Ball State. I have UCF winning over Utah. I have Xavier defeating St. John's. Villanova defeating Butler. Georgetown defeating Creighton. Penn State defeats Purdue. Radford will defeat Longwood. Lafayette will defeat Navy. Western Michigan defeats Ohio. And Kent State defeats Bowling Green. All right, next on the women's games for today, we have, I hope y'all can hear me out there in YouTube land. Anyway, you have Old Dominion versus Louisiana, James Madison versus Southern Miss, App State versus Troy, Eastern Kentucky versus Lipscomb, Central Arkansas versus Queens University, Austin Peay versus North Alabama, Houston versus TCU, Charlotte versus Tulane, BYU versus Kansas, Providence versus Marquette, Indiana versus Wisconsin, Georgia State versus UL Monroe, UConn versus DePaul, San Diego State versus Grand Canyon, Richmond versus St. Louis, Kansas State versus Arizona, Marshall versus South Alabama, Georgia Southern versus Texas State, Coastal Carolina versus Arkansas State, New Mexico versus Wyoming, Utah State versus Air Force, Oklahoma State versus Arizona State, West Virginia versus Colorado, Illinois versus Oregon, South Dakota State versus St. Thomas in Minnesota, Boise State versus Nevada, Rutgers versus UCLA, Fresno State versus San Jose State. Now, my picks for those games are as follows. I have Louisiana defeating Old Dominion, Southern Miss defeating James Madison, Troy defeating App State, Lipscomb defeating Eastern Kentucky, Queens University defeating Central Arkansas, North Alabama defeating Austin Peay, Houston defeating TCU, Tulane losing to Charlotte, BYU defeating Kansas, Providence defeating Marquette, Indiana will defeat Wisconsin, Georgia State will defeat UL Monroe, UConn will defeat DePaul, San Diego State will defeat Grand Canyon, Richmond defeats St. Louis, Kansas State will defeat Arizona, Marshall will defeat South Alabama, Georgia Southern will defeat Texas State, Coastal Carolina will defeat Arkansas State, New Mexico will defeat Wyoming, Utah State will defeat Air Force, Oklahoma State will defeat Arizona State, or I'm sorry, will lose to Arizona State, sorry. I have Colorado defeating West Virginia, Oregon defeating Illinois, South Dakota State defeating St. Thomas in Minnesota, Boise State defeating Nevada, Rutgers actually beating UCLA. I know that's a monkey wrench, but that's okay. You have Fresno State losing to San Jose State. All right, that's your women's games. Now let's look at your men's basketball games. More people probably care about that than they do the women, but I don't know. Anyway, we have Wofford versus VMI, South Carolina Upstate versus UNC Asheville, Seton Hall versus Villanova, South Alabama versus App State, Michigan State versus Minnesota, UCF versus Houston, Notre Dame versus Louisville, Texas A&M versus Alabama, Bucknell versus American University, George Washington versus St. Joseph's, Duquesne versus George Mason, UTSA versus South Florida, Tulsa versus Florida Atlantic, Army versus Colgate, Winthrop versus Radford, Longwood versus Gardner-Webb, Charleston Southern versus High Point, Butler versus Providence, Lehigh versus Loyola, Maryland, Navy versus Lafayette, St. Thomas, Minnesota versus South Dakota State, Youngstown State versus Purdue Fort Wayne, Oakland versus Cleveland State, Wright State versus Robert Morris, and you have Green Bay versus Northern Kentucky. Now, in those games, my picks are Wofford to defeat VMI, South Carolina Upstate defeating UNC Asheville, Seton Hall defeating Villanova, South Alabama defeats Appalachian State, Michigan State defeats Minnesota, Houston will defeat UCF, Louisville defeats Notre Dame, Alabama defeats Texas A&M, American University will defeat Bucknell, George Washington will defeat St. Joseph's, Duquesne will defeat George Mason, UTSA loses to South Florida, Tulsa loses to Florida Atlantic, Army will lose to Colgate, Winthrop will defeat Radford, Longwood will defeat Gardner-Webb, Charleston Southern will defeat High Point, Butler will defeat Providence, Lehigh will defeat Loyola, Maryland, Lafayette will, let's see, Lafayette will defeat Navy. South Dakota State will defeat St. Thomas in Minnesota. Youngstown State will defeat Purdue Fort Wayne. Oakland will defeat Cleveland State. Wright State defeats Robert Morris. Green Bay defeats Northern Kentucky. Now, there are a few other men's games today. So, the rest of the men's games that we have Liberty versus Delaware, Charlotte versus Wichita State, Creighton versus Georgetown, North Alabama versus Central Arkansas, Florida International versus Middle Tennessee, UTEP versus Sam Houston, New Mexico State versus Louisiana Tech, North Texas versus Rice, Colorado versus Baylor, Maryland Eastern Shore versus South Carolina State, Georgia Tech versus California, South Dakota versus Kansas City, Detroit Mercy versus Milwaukee, Lipscomb versus Austin Peay, Northwestern versus Illinois, BYU versus Oklahoma State, Arizona State versus Utah, Oklahoma versus Kentucky, Gonzaga versus Portland, Clemson versus Stanford, Santa Clara versus Pacific, San Diego versus St. Mary's, Pepperdine versus Seattle University, Loyola Marymount versus San Francisco, Utah State versus New Mexico, Washington State versus Oregon State, Iowa versus Washington. Now, here's my picks for those men's games. I have Delaware defeating Liberty. I have Wichita State defeating Charlotte, Georgetown defeating Creighton, Central Arkansas defeating North Alabama, Florida International defeats Middle Tennessee, UTEP will defeat Sam Houston, New Mexico State will defeat Louisiana Tech, North Texas will defeat Rice, Colorado will defeat Baylor, Maryland Eastern Shore will defeat South Carolina State, Georgia Tech will defeat California, South Dakota will defeat Kansas City, Milwaukee will defeat Detroit Mercy, Lipscomb will defeat Austin Peay, Illinois will defeat Northwestern, BYU will defeat Oklahoma State, Arizona State will lose to Utah, Oklahoma loses to Kentucky, Gonzaga will defeat Portland, Clemson will defeat Stanford, Pacific will defeat Santa Clara, St. Mary's will defeat San Diego, Seattle University will defeat Pepperdine, San Francisco will defeat Loyola Marymount, Utah State will defeat New Mexico, Washington State will defeat Oregon State, Iowa will defeat Washington. So, one quick more time, we will go over the men and women's AP poll top 25 for college basketball, and then we'll move on to other topics today. For women's college basketball, in the top 25, you have number 1, UConn, number 2, UCLA, number 3, South Carolina, number 4, Texas, number 5, LSU, number 6, Louisville, number 7, Vanderbilt, number 8, Michigan, number 9, Ohio State, number 10, Iowa, number 11, Oklahoma, number 12, Michigan State, number 13, Ole Miss, number 14, TCU, number 15, Baylor, number 16, Kentucky, number 17, Duke, number 18, Texas Tech, number 19, Tennessee, number 20 will be West Virginia, number 21, Alabama, number 22, Maryland, number 23, Princeton, 24 is Washington, and 25 is North Carolina. For the men's top 25, we have number 1, Arizona, number 2, Michigan, number 3, UConn, number 4, Duke, number 5, Illinois, number 6, Gonzaga, number 7, Iowa State, number 8, Houston, number 9, Nebraska, number 10, Michigan State, number 11, Kansas, number 12, Purdue, number 13, Texas Tech, 14 is North Carolina, 15 is Vanderbilt, 16 is BYU, 17 is Florida, number 18, Virginia, 19, St. Louis, number 20, Clemson, 21, Arkansas, 22, St. John's, 23, Miami and Ohio, 24, Louisville, and 25, Tennessee. That's your men and women's basketball games with the AP poll top 25. We'll now move to NBA G League games. And those G League games are taking place today. I'll go over who's playing, and then I'll make my picks. We have Texas versus Austin. We have Valley versus Rio Grande Valley. We have Noblesville versus Osceola. We have Cleveland versus College Park. South Bay versus Capital City, Maine versus Sioux Falls, San Diego versus Salt Lake City. In those games, my picks are as follows. I have Texas defeating Austin. I have Valley defeating Rio Grande Valley. I have Noblesville defeating Osceola. I have College Park defeating Cleveland. I have Capital City defeating South Bay. I have Sioux Falls to defeat Maine. And I have San Diego to defeat Salt Lake City. Now we'll look at regular NBA basketball games today. In those games, you have Denver versus New York, Minnesota versus Toronto, Boston versus Houston, New Orleans versus Milwaukee, Oklahoma City versus San Antonio, Memphis versus the Los Angeles Clippers. So anyway, my picks for those games are as follows. I have New York defeating Denver, Toronto defeats Minnesota, Boston loses to Houston, Milwaukee defeats New Orleans, Oklahoma City defeats San Antonio, Memphis will defeat Sacramento, Cleveland will defeat the Los Angeles Clippers. All right, now we're going to move to hockey. We'll start with the National Hockey League, or NHL. On those games, you have Boston versus Florida, Chicago versus Columbus, Montreal versus Winnipeg, Minnesota versus Nashville, San Jose versus Colorado, St. Louis versus Dallas, Edmonton versus Calgary, Vancouver versus Vegas, Seattle versus Los Angeles. My picks for those games, I have Florida defeating Boston, Chicago defeating Columbus, Montreal defeating Winnipeg, Nashville defeating Minnesota, Colorado defeating San Jose, Detroit defeating Utah, St. Louis defeating Dallas. St. Louis losing to Dallas. I have Calgary defeating Edmonton, Vegas defeating Vancouver, and Florida defeating Los Angeles. Now we have different other things as hockey as well. In the ACHA Division I men, also in Division II men, there are no games scheduled today. In Division I men, you have Minot State versus University of Mary, and I'm going to go Minot State on that for the ACHA Division I. Again, in ACHA Division II, no games scheduled. ACHA Men's Division III, no games scheduled. ACHA Division I Women's games, no games scheduled. In ACHA Division II Women, you have Boston College versus Harvard, and I have Harvard beating Boston College on that one. In the ECHL, you have Worcester versus Adirondack. You have Cincinnati versus versus Kalamazoo. You have Fort Wayne versus Wheeling. You have Florida versus Atlanta. Rapid City versus Wichita. I have Iowa versus Kansas City. Norfolk versus Allen. Greenville versus Idaho. And Utah versus Tahoe. So in the ECHL, my picks are as follows. Worcester defeats Adirondack. I have Kalamazoo defeating Cincinnati. Fort Wayne will defeat Wheeling. Florida will defeat Atlanta. Rapid City loses to Wichita. I have Kansas City winning over Iowa. Norfolk will defeat Allen. And I have Idaho defeating Greenville. And Utah will defeat Tahoe. In the SPHL, you have Peoria versus Evansville. I'm going to go Peoria to win that one. In the FPHL, there's no game scheduled. In the NAHL, no games scheduled. In the OHL, you have Kitchener versus London, and this is in Canada. You have Kingston versus Brantford. So I'm going to go London over Kitchener and Kingston over Brantford. In the NA3HL, you have New Hampshire versus Mountain Kings. You have the New Hampshire Junior Mountain Kings versus the Maine versus the Long Beach Sharks. I'm going to go with the New Hampshire Junior Mountain Kings losing to Maine Nordiques, and I have the Buds defeating Long Beach Sharks. In the AHL, you have Providence versus Bridgeport, Springfield versus Syracuse, Utica versus Laval, Hershey versus Wilkes Barres Scranton, Tucson versus Ontario, Henderson versus San Diego, Coachella Valley versus San Jose. So in those games, I have Laval to defeat Utica. I have Bridgeport to defeat Providence. I have Wilkes-Barre Scranton defeating Hershey. I have Syracuse defeating Utica. Yeah. Anyway, I have Ontario defeating Tucson. I have San Diego defeating Henderson and losing to San Jose. In the USHL, no games scheduled today. In the NCAA men's hockey, no games scheduled. NCAA women's hockey, no games scheduled. The USCHO Division 1 men, Division 2 and Division 3, no games scheduled today. In the USCHO Division 1 women's or Division 3, there's no games scheduled. And there's no Division 2 team, so no representation there. In the Professional Women's Hockey League, you have no games scheduled for today. So there you have it. That is all of the hockey picks. We have the men and women's college basketball. We have the NBA G League. We have NBA games. We have the NHL hockey, and we have other hockey things that go on. And those are my picks for that. So hoops and pucks and Wednesdays, oh my. Anyway, thank you for taking the time to hear this broadcast today. I thank you very much for joining me here on Sports Live Media. If you will, please hit the like button, please hit the subscribe button, and please hit the notification bell so you can be made when I'm doing these live streams, when I have sports action videos, when I have sports education videos, when I broadcast live, or when I have breaking news in the sports world. If you wish to subscribe to the channel, you can do so in two different ways. One, you can go to www.youtube.com, the slash symbol at SPORTSLOV, or you can go on the YouTube search tab and put in Sports Live Media as two words, SPORTSLOV as your first word, media as your second word, MEDIA. You'll know it's me because I have Sports Live Media burned into a basketball as my avatar. I'm also on Twitter X, and you can find me there at BobAmin16. That is at BOBAMIN16. We're going to, not necessarily every Friday, but most Fridays, and we're going to talk college and college baseball and college softball. We are going to go through those games, and I'll make picks on that. The hoops and pucks and Wednesdays, oh my, will continue as a Wednesday live stream that will take place on Wednesdays. We will make some changes after the last Friday or the last Wednesday in February, but we will continue doing in the regular format through the last Wednesday in February, and then we'll do some different things after that. We're looking at possibly introducing other live streams as appropriate. I will be doing live streaming of actual live games from time to time, and I'll make sure I announce that as best I can, and when I know it will happen. We'll also continue having sports action videos, sports education videos. I'll continue with the breaking news and anything else that goes on in the sports world. I'll try to let you know what's going on. Well, anyway, thank you for joining me today. Does anybody have any questions? Well, if not, thank you for joining me today.